Welcome back, viewers. You're still here on Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. Now, for a while now, we've been talking about the possibility of the United States re-entering the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. Once again, we have had an incident in the open waters in the Strait of Hormuz, where the U.S. says one of its Coast Guard ships has fired warning shots, 30 warning shots, in fact, towards Iranian vessels, which were apparently in some form of threatening position towards U.S. vessels. As I said, at the same time, we do have the Vienna talks happening. Some days we're told that things are going extremely well, and other days reports come out of major obstacles in the path. And of course, one of the biggest obstacles is Iran's demand for all sanctions to be lifted in one go. Then on top of that, we have within the U.S. establishment as well, between Democrats and Republicans, the argument over sanctions altogether. We've had now 50 members of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, calling on Biden to lift the sanctions in line with that nuclear deal. And on the other side, not too long ago, we'd spoken about on this show, Republicans, in fact, asking for the very opposite, trying to tie Biden's hands so that he cannot then lift the sanctions as promised for the Iranians and as Donald Trump had placed on the Islamic Republic as well. Let's discuss all of those issues a bit further. We're now joined by Dr. Deina Abdelkader, who is an Associate Professor of International Relations at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. She's also a Research Associate for the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard University. She's joining us this morning from Lowell, Massachusetts. Joining us from Portland, Oregon this morning is Dr. Robert Asaadi, who's an instructor of political science and international studies at Portland State University. He's also the author of Post-Revolutionary Iran, the Leader, the People, and the Three Powers. And joining us from Washington, D.C. is Reza Khanzadeh, who is a research fellow at Sharif University think tank. He's also a PhD candidate at the University of Oxford, and he works with Iranian organizations on issues related to human rights, public policy, and foreign relations. Reza, Robert, and Deina, thank you to all three of you for your time today. Deina, I'd like to start with you. Overall, as I said, there are days that come and go that in one day it seems that things are going very well when it comes to those talks, and on other days it seems like the obstacles are impossible to overcome. What is your reading about where we're at right now, possibly about the U.S. re-entering the deal at all?
My reading is it's very complicated because, as you well know, the degree of variance and the degree of polarization in the United States has a lot to do with the Iranian situation. The Obama policies and the brokerage of a deal with Iran during the Obama presidency created a lot of angst in certain political circles here, and that was utilized in the polarization process later on in elections. So that's definitely not going to pan out well, even with the Democratic Party in such control, even with Biden being part of the original agreement. So it is a very tense moment. I just like to say that preceding the incident that we're talking about today, a ship was captured at sea with armaments, Russian armaments, that was intended to go to the Houthis of Yemen. And that is not really highlighted or mentioned, but you know, the U.S. captured those ships, and it did take all the Kalashnikovs or similar to Kalashnikovs on that ship. So it seems to me to be a continuation of quid pro quo.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Robert. A lot has happened, right, ever since Donald Trump walked away from the deal. I wonder, and I've asked many experts this, is it even possible realistically to expect these two to really be able to come to an understanding amongst each other, considering the mistrust has probably only gotten significantly worse in these years?
Right, exactly. I think that's a really, that's a really important point. It seems to me this recent incident, it highlights kind of three lines of inquiry. First, there's the regional security dynamic. Second, the nuclear issue itself, as you mentioned. And third, the point about U.S. domestic politics. So the first thing I would say is just to bring to the attention of your viewers that such clashes in the Gulf are, of course, not without precedent. Your viewers may recall on January 12th, 2016, a U.S. vessel actually drifted into Iran's territorial waters and was seized by Iranian Revolutionary Guard patrol boats. the 10 American sailors on board were held for a period of only 16 hours, precisely because Iranian and American diplomats were able to communicate about the matter and explain this was a result of a technical failure and not a kind of incursion into Iran's territorial waters. And the American sailors were released without incident. So this is the critical connection between these types of incidences and the necessity of normal diplomatic relations between Iran and the U.S., which you rightly point out, since May 2018, when the United States unilaterally withdrew from the JCPOA outside of the dispute resolution mechanism, which was part of the deal, right? These negotiators were not naive in thinking that there wouldn't be disputes between the parties. The U.S. chose not to use the dispute resolution mechanism and withdrew. Yes. Regarding kind of future prospects, the final thing I can say is there's actually new public opinion polling data of Iranians from February of this year, and 64% of Iranians say they would like the next president. Presidential elections in Iran will be happening next month. 64% of Iranians said we would like the next president to be someone who currently critiques the current president, Rouhani, and his policies. And kind of the most prominent policy is his support for nuclear negotiations. So Indeed. Iranian public opinion seems to be swinging away from support for the deal.
Yeah, and I remember that incident, in fact, that had happened in the Gulf. I was a journalist in Iran at that time, and yes, you're completely right, Robert, that things have changed a lot. I mean, I would imagine that if that happened today, we'd be in a very different situation. And Reza, I wanted to, in fact, pick up on that very point and, talk about the fact that things have changed so much in these years then. Even if we have somebody who comes into power, for example, in Iran, who still wants to hold on to the deal, what I imagine even a conservative or principalist, as they're known in Iran, may want to hold on to the deal, but can it survive in its current, shape and its current write-up? Because it seems that, again, so much has changed and the other side is not now willing to lift the sanctions as promised, that we're at a crossroads and a stalemate that is very hard to overcome?
Yeah, I do think so. I think we have reached a certain type of stalemate that goes beyond just these foreign negotiations between Iran, Europe, and the U.S., also Russia and China. I think it's also domestic as well, and it has many layers to it. But on a very broad level, we have this power dynamic, if you will, between the IRGC and the conservative camp, if you will, and the moderates or the reformists, if you will. And it's kind of a power struggle almost for the future of Iran, because we see right now we have certain individuals coming and declaring their bid for presidency. Two key names right now that have come out is Sayed Mohammad and Hossein Dehban, who are both former members of the IRGC. And we're seeing that there could be a paradigm shift, quite a significant one too, seeing who's going to be the next president. Although foreign policy issues kind of go through, Khamenei, even still having these types of individuals running for president, if they do become president, it could be a much steeper hill to climb when it comes to JCPOA. And also keep in mind that in 2023, there's another part of the JCPOA where the U.S. The U.S. Congress would have to actually lift sanctions, and then also the Iranian parliament would have to ratify their end of the deal, which would allow more, more inspections by the IAEA. Whether or not that's going to happen, we have both domestic issues coming, because next year you have certain elections in the U.S. and then in 2024, obviously the U.S. presidency. So there's so many elections happening in these next couple of years. Who's going to be in power? Who's not? And it's much more layered than that. But just on a broad level, that's the complications we're looking at.
Indeed. Deina, then this goes to the Iranian argument. I want to play devil's advocate just for a moment. And the Iranians say, as you well know, Deina, that the U.S. establishment cannot get on one page when it comes to the Iran nuclear deal. And what does that then say about, again, in their words, the U.S.'s trustworthiness when it comes to it signing any deals? And again, this was not like a bilateral agreement anyhow. It was a multilateral agreement. Nevertheless, if we have one president signing something, the next president just comes in and says, no, I don't like that. I'm going to, walk away from this deal. What does that say about then stability on the part of U.S. foreign policy making?
I mean, in certain ways, and in many ways, actually, they would have a point, because for the first time, I think in U.S. history, not only partisan politics, but as one of your speakers said, basically the walking away was pretty unusual from the agreement. The problem of achieving or coming to an agreement is so rife because of the conflict in the area and the continuous struggle to create a regional hegemon, so to speak. Whether we talk about the situation in Syria, whether we talk about the situation in Yemen, there is a lot of, the U.S. alliance with the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, and sort of fostering this relation because of our foreign interests is very much to be blamed for, unfortunately, not really going through with the agreement, whether it is trust, as you mentioned, whether it is also related to how the people feel in Iran about going through another set of negotiations where they're disappointed and where things go back to square one. So on the regional level, I think the involvement of the U.S. In terms of having proxy wars and the attempt of Russia to come back as somewhat of a power in the Middle East region is very much indicative of the degree of stability and the degree to which a deal could be struck.
That's a very good point, isn't it, Robert? Because we do see ever so slowly the U.S., I wouldn't say completely walking away from the Middle East, but certainly, lowering its involvement within the Middle East region. Is this all, do you think, a part of that, where this almost, for many lawmakers, may not be a priority on their plates right now, that there are greater priorities in their minds, be it domestic or otherwise, and that others will then come and fill in the vacuum, as Deina there said, the Russians, for example?
Yes, I think that's a really important point. And just to pick up on what Deina just mentioned there, I think we've just now concluded the first 100 days of the Biden administration, and there is a noticeable shift, I think, in this idea of the U.S. security umbrella in the region. Jake Sullivan, the Biden administration national security advisor, said, for example, in a May 2020 Foreign Affairs piece that the U.S. security umbrella gives a blank check for destabilizing behavior on the part of in the region and keeps the region on the brink of wider conflict. So I think that there has been a shift from a higher kind of level of comfort with a U.S. military presence in the region, or U.S. Support for some of these states. For example, the first trip to a foreign country that the former President Trump took was not to Canada or Mexico, as is kind of the norm for U.S. presidents, but it was to Saudi Arabia. And he concluded a $110 billion arms deal as a part of that visit. So I think the Biden team, as you point out, is working toward a reduction of the U.S. military footprint in the Gulf region. The effect that has on Iran's neighbors in the Gulf, I think, remains to be seen. It highlights the really important point on regional security that I wanted to mention, and that is right now the main collective security organization is the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, which includes only 6 of the 8 littoral states of the Gulf. It excludes Iraq and Iran. And so in 2019, President Rouhani gave his proposal for a revision of this at the UN General Assembly, in which he outlined his plan called the Hormuz Peace Initiative, using the acronym HOPE. And it calls for all 8 littoral states of the Gulf to be included, maybe even Yemen, as well as the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. And, you know, it's something like an ASEAN for the Middle East, a kind of soft security focus for the Gulf region, emphasis on disaster relief coordination, humanitarian assistance, and so on, in the hope that functional cooperation can be built in areas of general shared interest, that this could then spill over to some of the more tricky issues relating to things like freedom of navigation.
Robert, I'm going to cut in. I do apologize. We're running out of time, so I do apologize for cutting in. Reza, I wanted to give you the final word before I let all 3 of you go. We have about a minute and a half left. On that point that Robert there was making, we have in fact seen an effort by Iran as well as other regional countries to talk to each other. And I know this has happened in the past too. It even happened during the era of Ahmadinejad also. That's not a new effort. But nevertheless, do you think that that will pick up pace now and that the countries in the region will somehow be able to, in fact, work through their differences and possibly secure the region to quite an extent on their own?
I do believe it will pick up pace, and I also believe that they will be able to kind of handle their own regional, problems or issues, if you will. More so now because of what's going on between Israel and Palestine and Hamas. And this is going to be interesting to see what's going to happen in the coming days and weeks, because as we've seen in the news, as far as the coverage is concerned, Saudi Arabia and Iran have had 5 meetings, I think, since January. And as far as what both sides are willing to speak on publicly, these have been positive meetings. And that's obviously going through Iraq. So we have very vital, countries within the region having these face-to-face meetings. And then also we have to keep in mind of the agreements that certain Arab countries had with Israel under the Trump administration, and how the Trump administration was kind of beating themselves up because they couldn't get Saudi Arabia to also join in that agreement. And that is telling, because now we have Saudi Arabia and Iran speaking to each other, which shows that there could be a shift. There could be a move away from this kind of, a passive agreement with the U.S. to allow Israel to act a certain way, or, have a foreign policy in a certain way, and kind of shift that back towards Palestine, because it seems like the entire world almost, with the exception of the United States, is on the side of Palestine. And there is a lot of conversations, throughout the Middle East that the Palestinians feel very much abandoned by their own people, so to speak, fellow Muslims. So this could be, a very serious shift if we see what happens within the coming weeks, for sure.
Indeed, and we'll definitely keep an eye on that, but we really appreciate Reza, Robert, and Deina for taking their time out, speaking to us respectively from Lowell, Portland, and Washington. We were discussing there U.S.-Iran relations within the context of what's happened in the Strait of Hormuz recently, U.S. warning shots towards Iranian ships. Again, not the first such incident, but significant nevertheless. Again, in the context of the Vienna talks, the U.S. effort seemingly to re-enter that deal, if that's even possible, really, considering the U.S. domestic realities, the fight between Republicans and Democrats over the sanctions relief that Iran was promised within that deal. This deal, of course, signed under Obama, canceled essentially, if we're to be completely honest, under Donald Trump. Can the U.S. simply just walk into it? There is also the Iranian domestic reality. Presidential elections just around the corner. What if a principalist is to win there? What does that then mean for the life of this deal? All of that, of course, is something that's really important to watch for. And as Deina there mentioned, regional context and regional involvement of both parties is extremely important as well. I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.